In just 30 years, it's estimated that over a third of us are going to live in cities. For comparison, a couple of centuries ago, only 3% of people lived in urban areas. Cities are the world's engine, generating 4/5 of the global GDP, but they're also responsible for 75% of global CO2 emissions. In this series, we're going to be exploring how our increasingly urban lives will be affected by climate change and what we can do to make our cities more sustainable. We're going to be looking at where we live, how we get around, and what we eat, all things that affect us and the planet. In this episode, we're going to be investigating how we get around and how our transport systems are going to need to adapt to a changing climate and a growing urban population. Across the UK, almost half of us commute to a completely different place to where we live, travelling long distances every single day. In London, 57% of us commute by car, which is a big problem because road transport makes up for a big proportion of our CO2 emissions. But most cities have a huge range of ways to get around, from taxis, buses, ferries, bikes, and even cable cars. Creating affordable, efficient and sustainable public transport, as well as redesigning cities to encourage more walking and cycling, is a key part of making cities more sustainable, but it comes with its own set of problems.
At the moment, transport is one of the biggest emitting sectors in cities. On average, about a third of emissions come from transport. This is as high as like 45% in some cities like Mexico, let's say. It also leads to air pollution. On-road transport leads to a lot of particulate matter. This has direct implication for people's health.
So we know that the rail network in particular, the track basically kind of performs less well at extremes of temperature. So in the very, very cold or in the very, very hot. So increased episodes of very high temperatures do cause us problems or increased delays on the rail network. So London is a growing city. So over the last 10 years, London population has grown by 1 million people. And the next 10 years, it's projected to grow by another million and then another million, then 10 years after that. So in the context of a growing population, it's really hard to try and think about how you can become a more sustainable city.
One of the most interesting developments has been influx of private players. So suddenly you have things like e-scooters and electric bikes, and of course private hire vehicle companies like Uber and others. Cities are still trying to get a handle on how this is all going to play out. But the other huge change and challenge is a changing climate. So in the future, when cities look at where to put all kinds of transport infrastructure, assessing what the risks are going to be. Are you worried about kind of heat waves? Are you in a floodplain? What kind of resilience do you need to build into whatever you're putting in place? And other things that we don't necessarily think about, like how our cities are constructed around ensuring kind of traffic flows and cars are flowing through them. And when we're trying to think about making cities vibrant, livable, welcoming places for people to live and thrive in, is that really how our cities should be constructed?
Really, really amazing public transport systems aren't just good for the environment, they are doing so much more. In cities like Nottingham, where less than half of residents have access to a car, public transport allows women, older people and people on lower incomes who are on average less likely to own a car to still be able to get around and play an active part in their neighbourhood.
So cities are trying to tackle both the emissions from transport, but then also move people to more sustainable modes. So trying to get people to use more public transit, walking and cycling, getting people out of private cars, because when you think about how much space a private car takes on a road versus people on bikes, you can have so many more people being able to travel through a city. And when you can afford it, everyone wants their own private car. And that's the dynamic we want to change, that cities want to change. So making it attractive to be on public transit, walk and cycle, which reduces emissions, but also makes cities generally better places to live, makes people more active.
In 2000, when TfL was set up, about half of mode share was by car and the other half was by walking, cycling, public transport. That's now at 64%, so that's gone up even in the context of a growing population. But we've got much more ambitious targets for it, so we want that to be 80% by 2041, which means taking another 3 million car trips off the road every day. So there's a lot of things we do to try and incentivise that shift towards sustainability. We invest obviously in public transport and in walking and cycling. So our investment in cycle infrastructure, for example, means that many more people have access to safe and attractive routes. If you look at something like Santander Cycles, just over half of the people who use that scheme say they got into cycling in London because of that scheme. So you can see that that investment really does pay off. Really, we're trying to put people's health and the health of the city at the heart of planning our roads and places so that people feel more inclined to walk and cycle and use sustainable modes. In 2003 we introduced the congestion charge. That was obviously very effective in reducing traffic in central London, so that removed 15% of traffic overnight in 2003, and that's stayed at that level ever since. Policies like the congestion charge and the ultra-low emission zone mean that for those vehicles that do stay, we try and make sure that they are kept out of the busiest places at the busiest time of day and that they're in the cleanest vehicles possible.
And then of course sometimes we'll still be left with people who need to drive places, and that's when things like electrification of cars comes in and becomes incredibly important. Cities like Shenzhen in China have 100% electric bus fleet. All their taxis are electric. If Shenzhen can do it, so can other cities. The fact that electrification is this faraway dream is no longer the case. It's really happening around the world. For example, I think it's in China, there's a spawned city scheme where 30 cities are putting in place like permeable pavements so that more of the floodwater can be absorbed. In Rome, they're putting tinted windows on buses and painting the roofs white so that the buses are cooler just by these simple changes. Building kind of shaded cycleways in Medellin and lots of greenery planted around them so it's cooler.
Continuing to invest in walking and cycling routes, continuing to invest in public transport, and to make sure that actually we have healthy alternatives for people. So reaching that 80% is a very, very stretching target, but through investment in public transport networks, that's really how you try and incentivise people to make the change.
So these are just some of the things cities are starting to think about to adapt to the changing climate and the changing needs of the population.
Worldwide, there are some amazing things going on already. Luxembourg has recently made all of its public transport free to encourage more people to use it and to reduce their impact on the environment. Hong Kong has been named the city with the most sustainable public transport links. Its far-reaching and famously efficient network carries 12.6 million people every single day. It accounts for 90% of journeys in the city, which is the highest percentage of anywhere in the world. But the most exciting is Utrecht in the Netherlands, who have just unveiled a plan for a brand new neighbourhood for 12,000 people, which will be completely car-free. All the things people need access to, as well as the train station, will be in walking or cycling distance.
I had to think about designing a transport system now. Everyone's dream who works in transport, I would say start with people, not vehicles, and making it a vibrant, active city to live in, vibrant, active neighbourhoods to live in.
We don't have long to act against climate change, and one of the easiest things that we can do as an individual is to make the way that we travel more sustainable. Whether it's your commute, or a trip to the shops, or a train ride at the weekend, swapping out a car for public transport where you can make a huge difference. If you do need a car to get to work or to do the school run, why not see if you can carpool? At the moment, cars in the UK are left parked 95% of the time, and if you live in cities, there are loads of apps where you can rent your neighbour's car when you need it, or even share cars like Zipcar. Have a look and see what you can find. If you want to go one step further, seeing where you can walk or cycle will massively reduce your carbon footprint and the carbon footprint of your city. Finally, if you don't think that your public transport is good enough, or if there are changes that you want to see made, then make sure that you make your voice heard and let your local representatives know what you want. I want to know what you think the city of the future might look like. Next week, in the final part of the series, we're going to be looking at how we eat and how it might change in the future. But until then, make sure you subscribe to the Hubbub channel to be the first person to see all of our videos.
And that's the end of the episode. To find out more and to get inspired, head to our website www.hubbub.org.uk, where you'll find loads of top tips to give you the spark to do things differently. Tune in for the next episode and come and join the Hubbub.